How's it going, everybody? I just wanted to kind of go over the book that I've been reading. I feel like somehow it's a story of storytelling. It dissects the components, but it tells a story while it does it. And overall, it's going to be like the shortest story ever told, or the story that is most true. Somehow it's going to reveal a character to us which embodies these things. And maybe we've already been identified with the character. I've been taking notes, and I would recommend this book to anybody. It's called 6 Memos for the Next Millennium by Italo Calvino, translation by Jeffrey Brock. And this character that we're introduced to at the very beginning, as Italo himself is feeling as though his world is becoming stone, he introduces us to Perseus. And in order to cut off Medusa's head without being turned to stone, Perseus supports himself on the lightest of stuff, wind and clouds. And then, when in danger of defeat, he only has to show it to his enemies. And I kind of have some examples of what's been going on here. I brought up a statue because I thought that it looked so perfect, almost, sitting here on this peak's face and overlooking the valley. And to some extent, maybe we have Perseus's ear as the only remaining thing here, as something which is meant to split all things, that as soon as it goes, the thing that's left behind is the thing that splits. So there's a lightness and a heaviness of all things. What goes to dust and memory, like what we're talked about in his first part here, lightness, where he says, talking about Lucretius, and Lucretius had this atomization of reality clear back in the day, where he begins to tell us that empty space is just as concrete as solid bodies. And so, as that statue, that pillar that we brought up here, has sort of become nothing, it has left behind something. And is this something nothing? Well, if we're to take the advice of Italo, he says to be as light as the bird, not as light as the feather. So, in a sense, it's as much as we could fly with it, which is to play with a thing, as much joy as that can bring. And maybe it's a reflection of how much joy it brings in the first place, and to recognize something within yourself, perhaps, as maybe the perception of what other people saw when they decided to destroy my pillar that was up here, as they saw nothing more than this. And so maybe as my reflection on myself, if I was to just come across this, what would I do? What would I see? Would I see it as me? He goes on to state that all things, and a lot of these historical writers touch upon this idea of lightness, of how things in this world exist much more in a state of transition. And they exist in this state of commonality almost. The common thing is the most prolific thing, obviously, but that same thing exists within all things. And he says, Ovid's is composed of the qualities, attributes, and forms that reveal the distinctiveness of every object and plant and animal and person, but that are merely thin sheaths over a common substance, which, when stirred by profound emotion, can change itself into radically different forms. So, I think that I could sort of almost intersperse some of the second chapter's statements into this now. When we're talking about lightness, we must also introduce other factors as well, like quickness, especially with regards to storytelling and how we tell the story of our own lives. For it says, a story of a king fell ill, and the majesty said, we want you to get well, you have to get a feather from an ogre. That will be hard since the ogre eats every soul he sees. Nothing is said about what illness the king has suffered from, or how an ogre could possibly have feathers, or what those caves were like, but everything that is mentioned plays a necessary role in the plot. And then we see that maybe when we understand a lot more of these things, we can realize that the truth of something isn't necessarily what is there. It isn't necessarily something that we can see. It isn't necessarily something heavy. Okay? For Galileo himself, then, on our stance for quickness, states this: if discoursing about a difficult problem were like carrying weights, where many horses can carry more sacks of grain than a single horse, I would agree that many discourses could do more than just one. But discoursing is like coursing, not like carrying, and one Barbary courser can outrun 100 Frisians. So I think that what that means is that when we collect and gather these notions together, and we try to piece together what life should be like, after all, what is the greatest or the most true story anyways? It's life. It's what happens and becomes naturally our surroundings. We maybe can see that as we take into consideration this quote as well. Galileo locates intellectual speed, the mind of God. He argues reasons instantaneously. Not by steps, and is thus infinitely superior to the human mind. So if we are trying to become as close to God as possible, would we not do away with the 100 Frisians trying to carry things, as Galileo has stated, and focus then on the lightness of our conversation and the coarseness of it, so that it's the most appealing and dawning, and in our reverie understand that everything is communicated, but we've chosen the path which is the greatest and the most true, because we understand that quality is itself the most important thing when considering that God reasons instantaneously, and that, as we then take into consideration another quote here, At this point, we must remind ourselves that the idea that the world is made up of weightless atoms surprises us because we have experienced the weight of things. Then is our life not as true if we understand that God reasons instantaneously and that atoms are of the lightest things which only call confusion to us because of the heaviness that we've experienced, but in no sense does that make them less true. And that if dialogue itself is to get to the root of all confirmations of existence through emotion, and emotion is conveyed just like all other things in a form, and a Barbary courser can outrun 100 Frisians, we should be much more like the Barbary and understand these things and take them into our lives. And say that value isn't necessarily something that we can see then either. Value in this experience lived is like all these things, and we should be what it is which creates that coarseness of richness within our lives. And understand that everybody who's trying to weigh us down is just like this man trying to tell a story who cannot communicate a story at all. Or understand anything that represents another thing, such as when we hear this story. The story is a horse, a means of transport with a particular gait, trot, or gallop, depending on the route to be traveled, and the speed at issue is a mental speed. And if we come to the place where we recognize, "Sir, this horse of yours has too hard a trot, so I beg you to kindly set me back on my feet," then maybe we can understand that we have a choice and we have decisions, that we can be light and that we can be free, that we can be like the bird. And we can have feathers, not just a feather. We can understand the lightness of comparing things. Perhaps Kafka simply wanted to tell us how going out in search of a bit of coal on a cold night in wartime can, with one simple swing of a bucket, turn into the quest of a knight errant, a caravan crossing a desert, a magical flight. An empty bucket that stands for deprivation and desire and pursuit that lifts you so high that your humble plea can no longer be granted. Besides, as soon as it was full, it would be unable to fly. Should we be weighed down by people who understand not the lightness of these things? And be put on a Frisian horse? One more thing while we're here. Some of my other favorite quotes of this is the scene where Don Quixote runs his lance through the sail of a windmill and gets lifted up into the air. Takes up only a few lines in the novel, yet it remains one of the most famous literary passages of all times. And from Shakespeare, as Mercutio makes his appearance, "You are a lover, borrow Cupid's wings, and soar with them above a common bound." Then Romeo, "Under love's heavy burden do I sink." And something else that I love in here was Galileo too saw the alphabet as the model for every combinatorics of minimal units, which I think is that if we try to actually give an example of perhaps the lightest things that we can use in the world and in our world, it's words. And if we're being told all these things, then I think that it's our duty, it's our responsibility as things which are in the pursuit of that which is the most high, that we are allowed the privilege to choose our words. And the sounds that surround us. As this is the structure of reality. And this is the story. And I think that if you wish to be the hero, this is what you need to use. This is the mindset that we need to have. We need to understand these things and act on them in our lives. But fear not if you're a heavy thing. Because again, the majority of it all is light.